Thank you for inviting me to speak. Firstly, thank you for the introduction, Sunand. Yes, I did start my professional career here with Sunand, which is great. I was actually at the Architectural Association doing some revalidation and examination, which is why I haven't been part of this. But I've listened to the feedback, which is interesting. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a very quick journey and then talk about this project we are doing. This is a UNEP-funded project which has just started looking at social housing, particularly in India, trying to see how you can mainstream some sustainability elements into it. I don't think we have the answers yet, and whether we'll have all the answers, but I think it's a journey that's happening. I will talk a bit about my India research because I think it will set the scene. I have managed to keep strong links in India, set some of the context why we're doing it, and then talk about the project. So this is what I do as a day job. I run the Oxford Institute for Sustainable Development. You may have come across. It's in Oxford Brookes University. Has about 65, 70 people drawn from real estate, construction, architecture. There are 8 research groups, one of which is my own group, which has about 15 of us, particularly working on building performance, energy, built environment. We work for research councils, Innovate, EU, World Bank, UNEP, those can be, at any given time, we'll have about 10 to 15 projects going. Done quite a bit of work looking at global common carbon metrics. My PhD was on carbon, so it's very much what I've been doing. I did some work in India to start with using some EU funding. It was a project with TERI, the Energy and Resources Institute, which you may know of, and some Spanish partners trying to set up a sustainable habitat design advisor. At that time, TERI were developing their GRIHA system. Has anybody come across that, GRIHA? It's the indigenous India building sustainability system, almost set up to oppose LEAD India. This is the fact of the matter. But we helped to start that off some years back. Did a few conferences, tried to get Sunand to go to India, but didn't happen that much. But we did get a special issue out on UK India research. It's very academic. It's very focused on scientists. So there were IIS in Institute of Science and Institute of Technology there. So it's a very data-driven kind of issue. But it's available, and if anybody's interested, I can send that. There are a few papers there which are still probably relevant. I managed to get World Bank to support us to do some work comparing the building stocks of India, UK, and US. And the reason why these 3 are there is just because I used to be a prof in Arizona for some time, and because I live in Oxford, and of course I go to India, just try to compare the 3. The interesting thing we discovered that time, which is probably true even today, is that there's hardly any data in India on energy. The policy formulation is happening with almost no data. The energy code, which is the ECBC, is only valid for commercial buildings and only ratified in 5 to 7 states. Because remember, the system is federal. States almost like not complying with what the central government tells them. It's part of the game probably. But it's not taken up yet. There is no code for residential buildings in India, which is phenomenal. If you think of there are about 150 million plus dwellings, probably more now. But no code to actually regulate. And that's a serious gap in knowledge. Things are changing, but there is still no code. Then I did some work for the UN Habitat, trying to look at greening sustainable social housing. This is again downloadable. All our research is in public domain, just to be clear. There is no copyright here. And then we got on to doing some work for the UN Habitat, trying to look at, and UNEP as well, in terms of social housing. I have got another interesting project on, which I'm not talking about, and I will mention it because it will be of interest to some of you, which is starting now with CEPT University in Ahmedabad. And essentially, we are looking at how to embed building performance within the green building movement. So my passion really is building performance evaluation. I do a lot of discover performance gaps and probably trouble people in saying, buildings don't perform as intended. We're trying to do that for India. So we're trying to set up a platform for the first time and do some research with institutions to embed that into PhDs, masters, undergraduate programs, and also do some fundamental research in that and try and customize that for India. I'm not going to talk about that because it just started last week. But I'll talk about something which has happened for 6 months, looking at social housing. Now, housing in India is about contributing about 24%. So it's fairly, 24% of carbon emissions come from energy used inside houses, and probably increasing. The other stat which is important is urban housing shortage is about 19 million. Urban housing. The rural is about 43 million. So I'm just going to focus on the urban housing for the moment. Just to put it in context, we have 26 million homes in UK. So that's almost a UK being built in 5 years. 95% of that shortage is actually in the LIG EWS sector. So that's where we are focusing this project on. India is also expected to urbanize, of course. And of course, this is a big opportunity as well if those houses are built green in whatever way. And as Sunand was saying, that even little bit improvement will help, because there will be an explosion of embodied energy. All the rules of the game are probably out when 19 million dwellings get added. The impact is high, whether you look at steel, paint production, glass, whichever side you look at for the housing sector, the environmental impact is very high. And what we set out to do, as it's called a Mashup Project, it's a 2-year research project. It's essentially looking at, with partners like Development Alternatives, you might know of, Terry and UN Habitat, to try and see how you can integrate sustainability into housing, into decision making, at the conceptual stage. Because that's where you can really influence, trying to work with government bodies, because UN Habitat is very active there, and trying to see whether we can develop some tools which can help in making those decisions more data-driven and also more helpful. And what we're trying to do is two things probably, is to develop some kind of a sustainability index to evaluate building technologies. You may not know this, there's been a dash for prefab housing, which is a little bit of a worry, because that may or may not work, in this desire to build too much without really evaluating which technologies work. And this is not just environmental, but looking at the social side, the economic side as well. And then try and develop some kind of a toolkit to help, provide guidelines when you're trying to design these projects. And that's really what we are trying to do. This work stream I'm not going to go into, but essentially what we've done so far, we've done a background study looking at defining the problem, and that is what I'll share. And then we have 5 case studies, one representing each climatic zone, and trying to apply them. So, which is quite interesting. And my main aim is to gather some data, because data is completely missing in India, and that's a big problem, I think, at the moment. Now, in terms of the findings, I'll give you the aspirations and then I'll give you the reality, let's say. So the aspirations is, of course, there's the Sustainable Development Goals, which, of course, India signed up to. There are plenty of goals within those which, directly influence housing, whether it's communities or it's looking at sustainable cities or climate action. India's also signed up to the Paris Agreement, 33% reduction by 2030. So all that is in, legislated and enforced. But whether, it will be implemented, let's see. The new urban agenda, of course, that's come out of Habitat 3 is also very much, part of the discussion. So there's a lot of aspiration which should influence, the sustainability aspects of the built environment generally. But the reality is, just to be clear, 10 lakh is 1 million. Just to put it in context. I've deliberately not put in million here because that's how the data is. So LIG and EWS is if you look at the right-hand side of that picture, you can see most of the new housing required is in that sector. The other, HIG and MIG is fairly less, and these are quite small.
You might just have to say what that means.
Okay, so LIG is low income group, EWS is economically weaker section. So that part of the society which really needs that housing, and there's a big shortage, and that housing will be built. It's better that it's sustainable because of implications at various aspects, not just energy. And really this is defined by income that the household has and the size of the housing. So it's got those, that's where we are focusing, this project on. So there was this big launch for Housing for All. You may have come across. This was launched at the World Habitat Day, and the center person sitting there is the urban minister, and essentially he said that we are going to deliver those 19 million homes by 2022. So that's the Housing for All program. And then you see prefab. So you can see all of that happening. I'm just giving you the aspirations and the policy. So we did a review of policy without going into the policy and boring you all. But essentially, I'll give you what we found. Now, interestingly, there's a recognition repeatedly that it's the public sector responsibility for housing the poor. It is still seen as, the main thing. But the focus is very much on affordability and quantity, not about sustainability. This is the reality. So, it's about how quick you do it, how affordable it is, and the design of the housing programs are usually done, as per how much the target group earns, which is what I was showing you before, and where they live, whether it's urban or rural. Data tends to be important, but data is not there. So, data is sometimes quite, flaky. The R&D into building technologies could still deliver a silver bullet because, so much of housing is to be built. So that may solve some of the issues, but not completely, of course, and may also help in reducing housing costs. But again, research needs to be done there. And of course, there's a big need to develop those financial and those implementing institutions at the state level. And what we've been doing now is looking at 5 states, including UP, for instance, trying to see what the housing situation is there. Interestingly, in terms of sustainability, there are some tools now. Griha is well known. It has about 800 projects certified. IGBC is the Indian Green Building Council, which is really delivering the lead India. And then you have a CPWD, which is Central Public Works Department, which has a kind of a point-based system for choosing materials. And there's an Eco-Nirman, which is a more ecological kind of a tool. Now, the interesting thing in India is that you get a lot of extra FAR, floor area ratio, or FSI, if you are having a green registration. So that means if you register to get Griha, you would be given extra FAR. But it's not seen in reality whether it's certified. So that's a big gap. So there is no evidence whether it's actually even done, because it's all intent. And that's something which is quite startling. There is virtually no data published by Griha on actually, how well these green buildings perform or not. But it is the national kind of a system. Actually, both of them are national. That's another thing we found quite surprising. There was not one national sustainability system. There are still, a multitude of those. So at the moment, what we are doing is we are trying to map these attributes, for instance, for, looking at materials and technologies. So, the green ones are the environmental one, the yellow ones are the economic ones, the white ones are the social ones. Without going through them in detail, essentially what we are saying is, which of these attributes we can get data from published work, tier 1, tier 2, which ones we need to do a field survey to get, for instance, the influence of materiality on indoor air quality. I think it's not just the outdoor air quality, it's the indoor air quality. So I'm very interested in monitoring PM 2.5 within homes, because I think that will be very high there. And then try and see what data is going to be unavailable, is simply not going to be there. So we're trying to look at it from a research perspective and trying to bring that kind of academic rigor into it. And what we managed to do, I think successfully so far, is that we've aligned that with what the government wants to deliver in terms of trying to get people to increase the take-up of sustainable materials. So we've taken their attributes, added some of ours, and provided the measurement methods rather than replicate and then compete with them. There was no point. So I think that's something that we've managed to do so far in the project. So overall, what's the summary so far? Urban development and energy and resource, efficiency initiatives are not linked, certainly. They are seen as separate things, and that's a bit of a worry. I think this year is quite important because there's going to be a review of the 2007 National Urban Housing and Habitat Policy, which has housing, development, sustainability, construction within it. And that's going to be reviewed this year. And the 5-year plans, as you know, have been replaced by other things happening, and those are also going to be set up. So I think this is an important year. The green building certification market is there, but it's fragmented. It's people don't know which one to go for, and I think one has to be careful. And there's a lot of learning from the West here, certainly, where we've had performance gap, we've had greenwash, and if the incentives that are currently there are for registration, not for certification, actually. So, and I think that certainly needs to be addressed. And then there are also limited impact of green incentives based just on regulation, because if you're just saying you can increase your FAR because you're building a green house or a green building, it's not enough. You need to capacity build, training. There's lots of other things that need to be done alongside. Simply by regulating, which is probably not enforced, is not enough. So that's really where I am. There is a website. I've got some leaflets if people are interested, but I think I'm going to leave it here and let the discussion flow, I think. Is that okay?
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.